before you send that cold email, before you make that cold call, check if you can get a warm path. Because if you can, why wouldn't you? And it's like every salesperson marketer knows that a referral or a warm intro is like a better deal, more likely to close, it's faster. And like, but it's not a silver bullet. Like a go-to-network motion is not going to magically get you every single customer you want. You might have to go cold, but at least be knowledgeable about your options. And a lot of what we say is we help you pick a better messenger, right? So like all those AI tools and signal tools, they're all obsessed with how do you write a better message. But as we just talked about, like the message is sometimes less important than the messenger and the timing.
What's up, everyone? Today we have the pleasure of sitting down with Mac Reddin, founder and CEO of Commsor. Mac is a career-long entrepreneur. His first business was a gaming network built on top of Minecraft, which peaked at 150K users per day. He went on to create various bootstrap businesses over the course of 5+ years. He created a Substack newsletter for the community space, which eventually evolved into an actual community of over 10K people. One day he took part in a no-code hackathon, and the idea of Commsor was born. Initially a community reporting and metrics platform. Today, Commsor is a 40-person company focused on curated introductions and building the go-to-network movement. Mac, thanks so much for your time today, man. Super pumped to chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I will say we're actually only 13 people, not 40. Just even smaller.
LinkedIn is like flat out lying to folks.
Oh yeah, LinkedIn has like people we have people who say they work there who don't. It's like, and LinkedIn gives you no way. You have to like go through one at a time, and like email and be like, hey, this person doesn't actually work here. Can you fix that? And they take like 6 months to respond. So
it's more impressive to be leaner, honestly.
Yeah.
So way to go. Kudos to you.
This episode was brought to you by our friends at Census. You probably have over 15 tools in your marketing tech stack, but how many of them have the full picture of your customer's journey? Census is the universal data layer in your stack. It unifies and cleans data from all your sources and makes it available for any app to use. Census makes it super easy to unify and standardize customer data, then enrich and enhance it, like running deduplication, cleaning, scoring, and routing workflows, and then sync and activate that data across all of your tools so you can actually do something with it. For marketers and data teams that work together to power big campaigns, it's so refreshing to work from a reliable source of truth. Don't just take my word for it though. Census is loved by awesome companies like HubSpot, Perplexity, Canva, Clay, Notion, and many more. Check them out at getcensus.com and tell them we sent you. We're just chatting before we press record. I think chatting with amazing humans like yourself is one of my favorite parts of doing the podcast, but also the creative outlet and doing some of the custom artwork and the header images for the blog post version of this. So I'm super pumped to finally have a reason to do like a dinosaur themed episode. For folks that aren't familiar with that, Commsor is all in on the dinosaur branding. Maybe like a fun one to get us started. Like what's the story behind the dinosaurs of the Commsor brand?
100% an accident, but I think that's like a lot of times the best things are, right? This is probably 2.5 years ago. If somebody on Twitter misspelled our name as Commsaur, and someone on our team took a screenshot of it and put it in Slack and was like, haha, like a dinosaur. And it just stuck. I don't know how else to describe it. It became an inside joke. It kind of became our internal branding over the next few months. And then it was like 6-9 months later, it was time for us to get rid of the crappy logo that I had made just to have a logo on day one, as you do as a founder. And we all sat down and we were like, okay, what could our logo be? And it's like, well, our internal logo is this like dinosaur thing. Why not just lean into it? And we were like, and there was like, nobody had a reason why we should do it, but also nobody had a reason why we shouldn't do it. So we just did it. Like there's no broad, like there's no like bullshit, greater meaning. There's no like, oh, dinosaurs were really good at warm intros, so it totally makes sense that our logo would be. It's like, it's just fun, and that's just no other reason to it than that.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, most logos are so boring. Like they're like some version of a cloud or an arrow
or some letter, right? It's like
they
pick the font, they pick the color.
And that's your logo. Dinosaurs are cool. Yeah, I love that.
I genuinely think the logo is a competitive advantage. People just get attached to it. And then we actually had someone a few months ago who booked an inbound demo, and they were like, hey, I'd seen you guys like 6 months ago. I'd looked at a bunch of competitors, and then I couldn't remember your name, but I remembered the dinosaur, and I actually they found one of our employees who had the dinosaur emoji in their name on LinkedIn. They're like, that's the company. And then they found us again and booked the demo. So it does drive business technically.
Yeah. And it's a way to be remarkable. You know what I mean? Like, oh, hey, dinosaur, So let's get into Outbound. And I know you probably have a lot of thoughts on this. And for me personally, a lot of people say Outbound is dead, or the predictable revenue playbook that so many people put into place is used by everyone. So it's essentially there's a sea of sameness when it comes to outreach. Yet at the same time, it's we can't kind of live without it. I feel like all of us reach out cold when we need something. When we need an introduction, when we need to have a guest on the podcast. Like so it's like kind of this necessary evil. I'd love to hear you riff on your take on Outbound a little bit, and especially with the emergence of AI, how does that play into it? What do you think?
I think in general, there's a really, really, really big difference between outbound and mass outbound. And a lot of times people they say outbound and they mean one of the, like we just said, right? Like we need outbound, right? Like reaching out for a podcast guest. Ideally though, you're not buying a list of names from like a data broker and just emailing 300 people or 1,000 people or 10,000 people and be like, want to be a guest on my podcast? Like, it's like, that's very, very different than like what I think most teams are actually doing when they say they're doing outbound. And so I think like cold outreach, it works, right? Like it is just like a fact of life that you have to get good at selling yourself and cold outreach if you want to build a business or succeed in a lot of different ways. The problem is it's kind of like human nature that when a thing works, we will find a way to do it so much that we will fuck it, basically. And it creates this vicious cycle. I've talked a lot about like the Ouroboros of outbound, right? Where it's like, hey, it works, so we do more of it, which makes buyers less receptive to it, which makes it harder to work. So we do more of it to compensate, which makes buyers less receptive. So we do more of it and like rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And I think especially in the last 2 years, that it's sort of started to come apart at the seams. And I've used this analogy as well of, have you seen Thelma and Louise, the movie? It's like, spoiler alert, if you haven't, I'm about to like tell you the ending basically. But at the end, they drive a car off a cliff. And I feel like sales and marketing when it comes to, and it's not just outbound, I think it's ads, like any sort of direct go-to-market motion. It feels like it's just like, we all kind of know it's not working as well as it used to, but we're still sitting in the car and we're still debating how to make the car go faster. And we all kind of know there's this proverbial cliff somewhere in the distance and we're going to get there eventually. But we're all like, you know what? It's not a problem right now. So we'll just keep going. We'll just keep going. And very few people are like, but what if we just like turn the car a little bit? Like what happens then? So I think that's the, I don't know, surface level of my take on outbound. Like it has a place. It certainly works. But I think it's just where it's devouring itself. And it's becoming the very thing that it isn't able to support.
And is that like, because I have this on my notes, the how do you say that? The Ouroboros?
The Ouroboros, yeah.
Is that like a Greek mythological creature or something?
Egyptian iconography.
Oh,
I
it's
think,
Egyptian.
from my research.
Yeah. And then it's existed in Norse mythology and throughout the Middle Ages. It's like a common thing that just showed up. It's like the world devouring serpent that devours itself and a bunch of stuff. But it kind of feels like outbound, and it feels like a lot of sales and marketing right now is this Ouroboros for everyone. And like I feel like everybody deep down, whether they or not, like kind of knows it, but nobody wants to do anything about it.
Yeah, I feel like there's two camps of folks. Like you fit into one a bit more, but I feel like you're a bit more reasonable with your take on outbound. Like you said, like it works when you're not buying lists. Like outbound has worked for like decades. But there are a lot of folks that are a bit more polarized. They're just like all outbound, whether you buy a list or not. If you reach out to me and we don't have an existing relationship, it is spam. All outbound is 100% spam. And those folks like distaste it. They think it's illegal in most countries, and like they think no one should be
outbound
doing
that people are doing is illegal, but no one seems to care. So that's a separate.
But then there's a whole other box. Obviously, like a lot more of those folks are the ones that have experience actually doing it and have been handed like budgets or like goals and like lead targets for a lot of folks, and they're the ones that have a lot more empathy for it, and they like some folks try to do it a bit better, like you said, the folks that are in the car and they're trying to turn it a little bit, like think about it differently. But like where do you like how do you think about that? Like is all outbound like 100% spam?
No, it isn't. I mean, I could see why you could argue it is. Like, it's sort of like, right? It's like even spam works sometimes, right? Otherwise, people wouldn't do it, right? It's like you see those like really shitty like scam outbound. Like, people wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work sometimes, right? I'm not saying it should work, but they wouldn't be doing it if it didn't work sometimes. But in general, I'll use another like old, I guess this is more Victorian era, but the tragedy of the commons. So I think one of the problems with outbound is that it does not exist in a vacuum. It doesn't matter if you're doing it really, really well. The fact that everyone else around you is doing it poorly is going to make it more challenging for you because it's a shared channel, right? Like if I'm a buyer and I'm getting tons of I'm getting like more outbound than ever. And there was some stat, and don't quote me on the exact number because I can't remember the exact source, but that the amount of outbound the average buyer in B2B experiences is 4 to 5 times higher than it was just 3 years ago. So buyers are now more likely to screen their phone calls or block unknown numbers or put spam filters on their inbox or install ad blockers and things like that because the volume has just gotten so great that they're going to throw out the good outbound with the bad outbound because they can't deal with it. And I remember having this conversation probably a year ago with a sales leader who was like, he told me I was a bad CEO because I didn't respond to outbound. And he's like, you don't know. He's like, you might be missing that one thing that's going to change your business's trajectory forever. And I was like, okay, sure. But that's assuming that like one, the person cold emailing me or calling me knows my business better than I do, which I really, really, really doubt is the case. If they do, that's probably why I'm a shit CEO. If like a random person trying to sell me something knows my business better than I do. But secondly, I'm not even like a big buyer, right? We're a small company. I can't even imagine what it's like for someone at a 500 or 1,000 person company. If all I did was respond to outbound and answer phone calls, I would probably never have time to do my actual job.
Seriously.
So I understand the people who get into this camp of feeling like all outbound is spam because there is so much of it that even if it's 1 in 50, 1 in 100, 1 in 200 are good and relevant, it just becomes a lot easier just to tune it all out and just say, nope, I just will not respond to that because I physically don't have time for it.
Yeah. And how do you think AI is going to like it? I assume you think AI is going to exacerbate the problem. And, I will share as a buyer of B2B products and services, I don't answer the phone. And I don't, if I get a text message that's not from someone I know, I just report it as spam. And then for people that use the in-mail thing, to message me on LinkedIn, I'll just block them. So I'm building my own little, fort around myself because I just dislike outbound so much. What now? There's a lot of talk about like AI making outbound scale up even more. And do you also think that it's just going to scale up the crap? Or is there actually some like benefit to
it's just going to amplify it. Like once again, like the tragedy of the commons problem, right? It's like, it doesn't matter if you or I are using AI to do it really, really well. It's going to make it so easy for everyone else to do it poorly. The problem is just going to get worse. And I think it's sort of like, we go back to like the outbound that works, right? The outbound that works is inherently not AI driven. It's very specific. It's very like one-to-one. And yeah, AI can maybe do some of it. I'm not saying it's not going to help or it won't have a use and it won't have a place, but I think it's going to do more harm than good in the short term, at least. Who knows? Like if we have perfect AI agents in 3 years that just run the world, it doesn't really matter. Outbound won't exist in any form, right? Like AI agents will just like telepathically talk to each other and buy and sell, and it won't matter what we think.
One of the things I've seen a lot around this conversation of AI is this term like signals. Like signals is coming in and data enrichment, and now we can make outbound way more personalized and actually useful for people. And if you look at your inbox, it's now just become a sea of people saying like, hey, I saw you post about this, or like this recent episode that you did with Daryl, it resonated with me. Like it's all the same fucking templates. Like everyone's doing the same thing. What are your thoughts on this like buzzword of like signals? Like, is it just like a rebrand of lead scoring with a trendier label? Like lead scoring has been around like forever. Like we're both Daryl and I are in marketing operations, and like tracking engagement attributes, demographics, firmographics, product interactions. Like some folks have said that the difference between signals and lead scoring is like a form factor thing, that like signals is a white box and lead scoring is more black box. But, you know, I've built plenty of transparent lead scoring models that, you know, reps could see what led to a certain score. Other folks say that like lead scoring is good for segmenting your book of business. Just curious your take on that.
I mean, in general, yeah, I think it's an evolution of lead scoring. It's, some parts the same, some parts different. I think the internet in general has made it easier to access a wider amount of signals about a potential buyer. And I also say that as someone who's like, I'm pushing this go to network thing. So like, I'm aware like, listen, if you work in B2B and you're not making up a term, you're probably shit at your job.
What are you
right?
doing?
Like, that's part of what you're supposed to do. Like if you're not making a due term, are you really in B2B marketing? Probably not. But in general, like you just said, right? It's like, let's say 2 years ago, before everybody was doing the, hey, I saw you like this post on LinkedIn play, that might have worked really well. Now everybody can do it at a click of a button. So it becomes spam, right? So it's like, is outbound spam? It almost never starts as spam, but it almost always evolves into spam. And I think the problem is outbound works really well if you are willing and able to be at that cutting edge of like, what is the new thing? What is unique? But if you're the follower and you're always like following after the fact, you're always going to be the shitty copy who is like doing, it's like anything, you get these templates where you can kind of feel like this, like I get all the time. I get that, hey, I saw you liked Phil's post on LinkedIn. Like, I'm like, that's just because I think Phil's cool and I'm supporting him. That does not mean I want to buy what Phil's talking about, right? Like, what do you mean? So I think this is just like outbound. There's ways to use them well. I think I know a lot of teams that use signals really well to actually cut down on the amount of outbound they're doing. So they're doing smarter outbound. I do think it's a bit of I think it's hilarious that people have started calling it warm outbound. It's like, just because I visited your website does not make it warm, but sure, maybe it's a nuanced thing. But yeah, I think it's another tool in a sales and a marketing team's stack, and it can be used well, it can be used poorly. We've used it to great success, but it's one of those things as well where I think if you over automate it and over systematize it, you end up like back at this level of it not working. And at the end of the day, I think people are so obsessed with writing better messages with AI and personalizing better with AI. And I just don't think that actually matters. If I look at where I've bought things over the last 2 years, it's almost never from a personalized message or a signal-based message.
Yeah.
It's all about relevance. If you message me a really shitty templated email, but you're selling me a thing that I'm currently thinking about, I'll probably respond. And I've gotten emails and outreach where it's like they have done their research. They have written the perfect one-to-one email for Mac. It references dinosaurs. They've clearly done their research. Like, it's so good. But they're selling me something that just doesn't matter to me. And it doesn't matter. Like, people are so obsessed with better messaging. All that matters is relevance. So I think using signals to drive better relevance in your messaging, timing of your messaging is great. Using it to do better personalization is pointless.
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this, and I think you're right on. I think one of the challenges is that, to be honest, like, no one really wants to receive outbound, and people only want to buy when they're ready or something that they're really looking for in the moment. But the challenge is you have sales and marketing teams that have to do like something, they have to like try to get business somehow. So like my theory is the intent data and all of the rise of intent data and signals, it's kind of like a little bit better than nothing is what is my first take. And the second one is like why it kind of keeps working is because at any given moment, there is actually maybe 1 or 2 people out of 100 that you're going to get lucky. And they're going to be like, oh, shoot, I do need that random SaaS software. Oh, my God.
Yeah.
this is amazing. You reached at the perfect time, but it's like just 2 people out of the 100. And so what we've been talking about is people just kind of keep going. They're like, oh, we reached 2 people out of 100. We're going to reach 20 people out of 1,000. We're going to,
Yeah, and that,
and
works,
it's just
right?
ruining
Like,
everybody's
if your
experience.
TAM is
but
tens of thousands,
Yeah.
great. What if you have 5,000 possible buyers, even 10? Like, you're going to go through that list real fast.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I feel like the age-old argument for cold outreach, oftentimes compared to like paid ads, is like, hey, cold outreach is free. It's free to email people. Like, yeah, maybe we bought a list, or like, oh, we scraped this list of emails, or now we're on InMail. It's free. Like, it doesn't cost anything compared to meta ads and whatever. But anyone who is in marketing ops, wears the email hat, knows that there is a big internal and reputational cost to cold outreach and email deliverability. And like, we don't have to get into that whole box there, but I love like, we wanted to get you on the show, Mac, because like, we think that Commsor takes like such a fresh approach to outreach. Like, you've written a bunch of content about this. Like, you think that the future of sales is go to network, and that cold prospecting should die, meaning that like, rather than doing cold or even warm outbound, as you kind of like called out there, is way better to try and get an intro from someone in your network that or maybe like a friend of a friend, to at least get that foot in the door and like start that conversation. But comparing that to what we just talked about, like feeding signals to AI agents and automating research and prospecting on your behalf, like, let's say a RevOps team is debating one of these 2 options, like signal powered outbound versus automated network intros, like Commsor helps with as their next investment. Like, how do you make the case for those RevOps folks that they shouldn't even bother with like signal based stuff, and they should focus on network over signals?
So I don't think it's quite as clear. I'm like doing my own business a disservice by saying, like, it depends. There's a place for both.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of our customers leverage both in parallel.
Yeah.
Like, I think signals can help tell you when is a good time to reach out to someone. Like, is someone thinking about what you're selling? So we've got a lot of customers that use signals to inform who should they be looking for intros to. And it's like, and they use that. It's like, I always like to say, we sell you a warm intro check. It's like it's like a check, but it's like, before you send that cold email, before you make that cold call, check if you can get a warm path. Because if you can, why wouldn't you? And it's like, every salesperson, marketer knows that a referral or a warm intro is like a better deal, more likely to close. It's faster. And like, but it's not a silver bullet. Like a go-to-network motion is not going to magically get you every single customer you want, or maybe it might help you hit your goals, but it's not a one-stop, solution to solve everything. So it's really more about like, how do you go warm when you can? And yeah, you're going to probably have to fall back on cold outbound, because it's very, very, very unlikely you can hit 100% of your target accounts with warm intros and warm messaging. So it's more about adding that nuance of like, why go warm or why go cold when you could go warm? You might have to go cold, but at least be knowledgeable about your options. And a lot of what we say is we help you pick a better messenger. Right. So like, all those AI tools and signal tools, they're all obsessed with how do you write a better message. But as we just talked about, like, the message is sometimes less important than the messenger and the timing.
I love that. That's so right on, because who is reaching out to you is more important, because they could send a really crappy message, actually. And I've gotten many, like, hey, are you free for 15 minutes? But then like, it's literally my peer at another company, same size, that I respect.
Them,
and I'm like,
you trust them. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just like, of course, or like, the CEO of Demandbase wanted my opinion on something, and he's like, hey, can we talk? And I'm like, yeah. You know what I mean? I was just like, oh, of course. I also think that the concept of warm, or like your networking a networking outreach, is stronger than intent. Because I was thinking about this, there's kind of like a social peer pressure kind of reciprocity at work. So let's say your friend or your coworker or your colleague says like, hey, I wanted you to introduce you to someone. You automatically feel like compelled by your friend or colleague to like, yeah, okay, I'll take the call. I'll take it for you. You know what I mean? I will take it for you.
Even if they deny, though, it's also a good sign of like, hey, I asked you for an intro to Phil. Phil said, I'm not interested. Cool. I'm not going to bother wasting time emailing Phil. Like he's already said, he's like, I got an answer. Right. And like 9 times out of 10, the hardest part about outbound is the silence. It's you're not getting a no, you're not getting a yes. It's just, you're just getting ignored. So you have no idea if it's good, bad, relevant, good timing, bad timing. It's just, you're just firing shit out into a black box and hoping that 2 to 3% fire back something.
There's also like another person, I would say, like that doesn't have like that is a little bit more objective, has validated your outreach, you know? Because if I say like, hey, Phil, like Mac wants to talk to you about something, Phil knows that like I'm not going to purposely waste Phil's time, you know? So like there's that additional level. So I think there's multiple factors that makes this idea of go to market via networking and warm intros and connections much stronger than intent, which I've already kind of talked badly about.
I will say that I think go to network. So at Commsor as a tool is a warm intro referral tool. That's what we are. But go to network as a philosophy, as we've built it and we're trying to like run it ourselves, is so much more than just like asking people for things. And I think that's where like, I think a lot of it's a mindset shift. A lot of salespeople are like, cool, I'll just ask people for shit. And you're like, okay, but like you have to also like create and build a network. You can't just like take. And that's a very hard thing for a lot of salespeople to understand because it's sort of like anti what they've been taught for the last decade on how to sell and what to do. So really that's why we like to call ourselves a go-to-network platform, not a warm intro tool, because there is this broader mindset shift where it has to be like a company-wide initiative to both create network and to activate network. You can't just do one.
Yeah, I feel like your perspective on that comes from your background in building communities, because community 101 is you don't want to be the person joining a community and just like asking other people for shit. Your first post is like, hey, I need feedback on this, or like, hey, can you go like my LinkedIn post, or like promotional, like ask.
Yeah.
Communities.
And we've all joined that Slack community where that's all it is. It's just people posting that shit and you're like, whoop, shit, delete, get out, I'm out. Nope, not interested.
And you've actually written about like, how do we start to transition, I forget if it was like BDR or SDRs into customer development rep roles, folks that focus on like building that network of fans and people that have like a similar problem. And we just kind of like band together and we like talk shop and we share solutions, and maybe organically we discover certain tools. Cause like I've purchased SaaS software from those communities, like dark social communities, where someone is just like, hey, I want advice on like finding a tool that's really good at lead scoring. And I actually look at the recommendations. Like I'll join a Slack channel and I'll like search for certain keywords or something that I'm looking for or pain that I have. And I see folks organically recommending stuff. Like I value that a lot more than, some of the other channels there. But yeah, maybe chat about that a little bit, like that, like transition from SDRs to CDR.
Well, for starters, I don't think people realize how much of their sales and marketing initiatives are working because of that dark social stuff. They're like, whoa, the ad worked. And you're like, no. The ad worked because the person had already asked in the community and heard about you, and the ad reminded them. But they didn't just like see an ad and go, ooh, I'll go spend 50 grand. I saw an ad. Cool. Right. Like that's just not how humans work. And I can't remember the source. I have to double check it and like add a little like voice note into this after the fact, be like, oh, this is the source. But that 84% of B2B purchases start with some form of referral, some form of reference referral. Like you post on LinkedIn, you see a recommendation, you ask someone directly, you get an intro request, whatever it is. Like if anybody listening to this thinks back with the last 10 things they bought, like really think about like, yeah, they might have cold called you, they might have cold emailed you, but what was the actual thing that led you to pull the trigger on that purchase? I bet you 8 out of 10 of those, it was someone you trusted said something, and that led to you actually being being interested in doing it. So anyways, I know a bit of sidebar to the SDR to NDR. So we used to call it a community development rep, which is where the CDR came from. And we've evolved it into the network development rep, mostly just to stay on brand. And I will say when we shared that playbook like 6 months ago, a bunch of people were like, this is just what good SDRs and BDRs do anyway. And I was like, yeah, that's that's kind of the point. Like the branding is really like, I'm not saying you should go actually change the titles of your roles. It was really just like, if I'd written a book saying like, here's the SDR playbook, you'd be like, cool, whatever. But like the NDR network development, would be like, huh, interesting. Like it's a marketing stunt. It catches your attention, right? But it kind of goes also back to this idea of like, should you be leveraging network or should you be leveraging intent signals? And I think what we wrote about in that is that basically there's two halves to an NDR's job. If somebody is like, hey, I want to buy right now, yeah, sell to them. Don't try to just like build a, go sell to that person. If they fill out a website form, if they indicate like an actual intent signal, do not beat around the bush because you will lose that deal.
Yeah.
But like the classic thing, right? Like only 5 to 10% of your buyers are actually doing that at any given time. So with the other 90%, instead of trying to sell to them, and like you said, hope that 2 of them are like, cool, yeah, I'll buy, and you just rinse and repeat, how do you actually build a network that compounds on itself? And the thing I always like to share is, what happens if you stop paying for ads? Stops working. What happens if you stop paying to make cold calls? You get no results. You stop paying to do cold emails. You get 0 results. What happens if you stop building a network or a community or whatever you want to call it? What you've built already exists and it'll keep growing. It'll keep compounding on itself. It's like it builds on itself. So it is a thing that can take longer to pay off than making the cold calls or doing the cold emails or the outbound. But it's one of those things like once that flywheel gets going, man, it's borderline magical. It's like it just, things are a lot easier. And even if you are still doing cold calls and cold email, if you've built a good brand, you built a good community, you built a network, that recognizability is going to make the cold stuff a lot easier.
This episode is brought to you by our friends at Knack. I have the amazing pleasure of chatting with some of the greatest minds in marketing operations, but you'd be shocked at how many of them have the same issues when it comes to their campaign creation process. They're dealing with things like scaling, personalization, keeping assets on brand, render testing emails, working in rigid templates, and worst of all, having to hand code emails. But many of the leaders in the space are using Knack to eliminate these headaches. Knack is a no-code email and landing page creation platform that covers initial campaign requests right until the sync to your marketing automation platform. Knack improves the whole campaign creation process by bringing the building, optimization, testing, collaboration, and also translation functions all in a single spot. So you don't have to jump around and coordinate feedback between a bunch of different people or wait on developers for very simple edits. Because at the end of the day, marketing ops folks want to focus on process and efficiency. Marketers want to focus on creativity, and Knack makes sure you get both and then some. Check them out at knack.com. That's KNAK, and tell them we sent you.
And what do you mean, like network development representative? Like what does their day-to-day look like? Are they, so they're not doing mass outreach, buying lists and whatever, but are they more of like having these discovery conversations? Are they like educating people? Like what?
So I think this is the hard part, is that it's like the SDR has been relegated to this like junior role, right? Get a list, make calls, good luck, have fun. An NDR, I think, can't. I mean, they could be a junior role, but it's not a role you can just be like, you can't train them in like a week and say good luck, have fun.
Okay.
I think an NDR has to be given space to actually understand the market, understand the buyer, have conversations, like not conversations to sell, but just go out to have conversations with customers, learn them, actually understand the space. I will say, I think an NDR is better off sitting under marketing. I think honestly, all SDRs, BDRs are they're a marketing function, not a sales function, but that's also a hotly debated topic, I think, right now. Their day-to-day is really about starting by being able to like segment who's a buyer and who's not right now. Once again, that could be a combination of signals, intent stuff, whatever. And you have 2 different plays. If they're buying, go sell, do your discovery calls, do your normal stuff. If they're not, it's all about how do you build relationships at scale. So that could be if your audience, if your buyers are on LinkedIn, how do you social sell? And not necessarily in a way that's like, I was just chatting with someone who sells to HR. They're a salesperson. They are not an HR rep. They are never going to post thought leadership content on LinkedIn that's going to get an HR person to like trust them, right? But what they have found is they've spoken to enough HR leaders. They understand the problems they have because they've been given the space to actually become like, at least like an adjacent subject matter expert in their space, which, by the way, is what all your sellers should be able to do anyways, regardless of what you call them, what their day-to-day looks like. And what they have found is they create memes. memes about HR and the pain points that recruiters are having. And like, so they're like, I'm never going to get a recruiter to listen to me about how they should implement their recruiting strategy, but I understand them enough that I can post humorous things to build relationships and get their attention and do that sort of stuff. So they're essentially finding ways to connect and build relationships in a non-salesy way. It could be stuff like when we were a community company, we had a huge community. We had our SDRs. The first touch point was just inviting people to join our community, not talking about our product, just like, hey, get into the community. We're doing this event next week. Do you want to come in? They would like, and we actually had them own that relationship. Their job was to get someone into the community and get them engaged within 30 days. So they were almost like the community onboarding expert. And then guess what? When that person in 6 months is like, you know what? I want to buy Commsor. They'd be like, hey, John SDR, who got me into the community, built this relationship with me. Like, I really want to learn about the tool now. And now they go back and they start a buying process.
Yeah, I like that. And just like you said, it's kind of like a hybrid marketing role a little bit. And I'm thinking that like the skills of like there's so many things you have to do as a marketer, and it's more of like the social, interactive, talking to people portion of marketing. But there's a whole other skill set of marketing, which is like create ads and look at the analytics and, create the website, send emails. Like that's kind of a different skill, even though many of us have both. But there's this other skill of like going out into the community, talking to a bunch of people. So preferably you're probably extroverted, right? It's like you're talking to a bunch of people, you're hosting like roundtables or something, right? And just getting people. It's almost like a mini version of, have you both heard of the evangelist role? There's like evangelists. Yeah. It's like a mini evangelist.
It's like an evangelist development role, essentially.
Evangelist
like
development role.
It's an EDR.
Yeah. Like evangelist I see as more of like, they're definitely doing more thought leadership.
Yeah.
And like maybe keynotes at conferences. But like NDRs are doing that in their local, whatever, territory, in their industries. And so they're evangelizing, but also they're saying like, well, when you're ready, let's talk. Let's do this.
Yeah.
I like
another example I love is it's a seller who sells to cybersecurity professionals. They are never going to speak the language that makes a cybersecurity professional trust them as a peer, right? That's just, they are probably, if there's an audience that distrusts salespeople, it's probably them, right? Like they're not going to enjoy their cold calls. So what they did was they started a local pickleball community for cybersecurity people in their city, because that's who they were selling to, because they love pickleball and they like did that. They now have 50 people, cybersecurity, like their target buyers, come together every month to play pickleball. They are now the person who like they're there, they're meeting them, they're getting to know them. They get this like positive affinity of like, I know you now, you created this cool thing for us. So a lot of it is really figuring out also the best sort of like sellers that I've seen adopt this NDR mentality is how do you inject your own personality into what you're doing versus becoming a script following robot, right? This seller, she loved pickleball. She wanted to sell to cybersecurity leaders. She combined those two into a thing that is like very natural for her to do. The guy doing memes, he likes memes. That's like a thing that comes naturally. So he figured out his thing that works there. I think that's where leaders struggle with this, because it is not a give people a script, have them follow it. Everyone on your team can do the exact same thing and it'll work perfectly all the time. But at the end of the day, if you look at the best sales reps, in my experience, at least in my history, they are rarely, I won't say never, but they are rarely the ones who follow the script. They are not the ones with the most activity. They're not the ones making the cold call. They are the ones who are getting creative, thinking outside the box, figuring out how to connect with buyers outside of a sales conversation. Like my sister was a BDR for a while, and her first job, she was the lowest performing BDR by activity for all 8 quarters she was there. Lowest number of calls, lowest number of emails. She was the highest performing BDR by conversion to closed won, conversion to meeting, ACV, 7 out of 8 quarters she was there. And she tells this story of like their CRO coming by and being like I can't remember, it was like, probably 3 or 4 quarters in, being like, why are your activity metrics so low? And it was like, why does that matter? I've hit quota all 4 quarters in a row. Like, why do you care? So I think it's really like the NDR role is there's an element of creativity that is hard to teach, but it's about giving people the space to build relationships and connections and understanding that listen, like there is a whole world between closed won and closed lost. And if you think the world if you approach the world in this binary, like you're either going to buy or you're not, you are not going to enjoy what you're doing. There's this whole world in between that you can unlock by thinking in this network driven way.
Such a cool perspective. Yeah, really appreciate that. There's almost like a couple different acronyms that we can name the role. There's, we said like evangelists, like EDR, CDR, NDR. There's also MDR for meme development reps. There's the whole world of memes there.
Like let each of your SDRs pick their own letter and figure out what it means for them. Are they the pickleball development rep, the meme development rep? But I think in general, I think the NDR or whatever you want to call it, to me is sort of the counterbalance to the rise of the GTM engineer. If the GTM engineer is the really technical, signal-based, data-driven sales rep, the NDR is the relationship side of that coin.
Very cool. Yeah, GTM engineer. We don't have to go down that rabbit hole there. There's a whole episode on that new buzzword. But
yeah,
I did want to ask you about measurement, because we said when in the intro that the initial idea for Commsor was helping communities use data to prove the impact of their work. I'm really fascinated about this space. We chatted a lot with like data scientists and like measurement experts on attribution and MMM and incrementality. And you were kind of like focused in this space for community managers. And I'm always having a struggle with measuring the ROI of marketing because of this like black box of like dark social, right? And community is a big piece of that. And I'm curious to get your take on this. Like you said that the quest for perfect attribution is completely false and it's a waste of time and money, but also that like companies would be way better off spending like a quarter of their time and budget on things that you will not be able to track. How were you able in the first early days to track the impact of a community and the folks that were participating in that community? Like maybe just chat about that a little bit.
So yeah, first I want to say like the quest for perfect attribution, as you quoted me there, is I'm not saying things shouldn't be attributable. I'm not saying we shouldn't measure things, but I think this goal of trying to be 100% measurable, one, that's impossible.
Yeah.
Like I just think anyone like it's just not possible. Like we are humans, right? Like there is stuff we're never going to be able to measure, right? You're never going to measure that someone talked about you in a Slack community that you don't have access to, right? Like it's just not going to happen. And I think a lot of teams miss out on really good marketing and sales ideas because they always start with how are we going to measure it? And if they can't answer that up front, they don't even bother trying. And sometimes the best things you can measure by just, and I know leaders are going to tell me that's not a valid answer. Sometimes you just know. You just know it works, right? Like, how do I know the Dinosaur brand works for us? Can I measure brand love? Yeah, I could probably hire some consultant to build some bullshit study to measure it for me. But you know what? I've never been on a podcast where it hasn't been brought up. So you know what? I know it works because people talk about it. They ask me about it. Sometimes you just know, and you have to be comfortable with that being the only thing you'll be able to measure. Specifically for community though, we measured a bunch of stuff. We measured like community qualified leads. We'd measure like someone joining our community and then becoming a lead, and like measuring like that journey of like they joined the community first. We had data that showed that people were 3 times more likely to buy if they had been engaged in our community in the 6 months before a sales conversation started versus if they just went straight to a sales conversation, which is why we also made our BDR outreach was get them in the community first. Don't try to sell them. Don't get a meeting. Get them engaged in the community, build the relationship. I think I can't remember the exact number, but our data was saying it was like 75% of our revenue came from deals that were touched by our community in some way, shape, or form. Like people engaged in the community before they bought. They were better deals. They were faster deals. They were more likely to buy. And it just, so I think a lot of it is like, you're measuring the incrementality, right? It's like, is it better if someone engages with the community versus doesn't? Not trying to measure this absolute number of just like the community drove $1 billion of revenue. Therefore, I'm glad we invested in it. It's like, you're really trying to measure like, are the numbers going up and in the right direction when this thing is involved? And as long as that's happening, keep doing it.
That's my thoughts exactly too. Because I think that companies get too caught up in trying to measure everything and like the popular one? What's the return on investment of this piece of content? Like people or like this single email. So that's the granularity that people are trying to measure. And, when in reality, a lot of, organic marketing and then just, things like PR, it's not necessarily like finger in the wind, but just like you said, you can tell. And generally, if things are getting better in terms of numbers, going up, like up into the right, like you said, things are generally getting better for the company,
Yeah.
And I think that the hard part is it's like a down the road or down the stream kind of thing. It's kind of hard to measure every single step, but it's gonna happen. And that's why, like, for events, I'm a big fan of event marketing, conferences and stuff. You can tell events are doing well when more people come and they keep on showing up. And like, to not, to always try to push, hey, what's the return on this event? What's the return on this? Like, I think you're doing a disservice to.
I think that mindset pushes marketers and salespeople to do the very things that make buyers not be interested, right? It's like, it's like, what's the return on investment on this content? Well, we got to gate it and follow up with every single person who downloads it. Great. I don't want to download your damn content anymore, right? It's like the quest for attribution gets in the way of the marketing and the sales and the relationship building, which is the actual thing that drives it. We did this thing about a year and a half ago with these purple hoodies, which is like, long story short, they were a mistake. Suddenly we had 400 hoodies. We didn't know what to do with them. It was 300 hoodies and we'd spent like $15,000 on them. I wrote a blog post about it and like the whole story, but yeah, and they didn't have our logo. They had the wrong dinosaur on them. So like, it's just a whole nightmare.
That's great.
And we sort of accidentally turned them into a market. We just started sending out to people, and there was no like, come to an event to get. People didn't know how to get them. They just started showing. People were like, how did that person get a hoodie? I want a hoodie. It became this like this thing. And I remember two things. One, I remember a CMO, like, I wrote a post about like how it worked for us. We drove like, I want to say it was like 2 million LinkedIn impressions with these hoodies. And like, we were just getting started with our pivot. So like, it really put us on the map with the sales audience. It really kind of like kickstarted the Commsor 2.0 for us. I remember CMO being like, you would have been better off spending that $15,000 on LinkedIn ads. And I was like, why? Like, first off, if I had paid for 2 million impressions on LinkedIn ads, it would have cost me like significantly more money. And each impression would have been worth less. Literally just today, like before this, I was on LinkedIn and I saw a video. Someone was just made a video talking and they're wearing one of our hoodies. Like, it's been a year and a half and those hoodies get mentioned every week. And once again, this goes back to like someone, it's probably 2 months ago on a podcast, someone was like, but how do you know it worked? How did you measure it? What's the attribution? I was like, it's been over a year and I'm on a podcast right now where you're asking me about it.
What does that tell you?
That's all I need to know. And I'm not saying every marketing or sales thing should fall into that category, but it's okay if 10 or 20% of stuff, I actually think actively 10 or 20% should fall into that category, because otherwise you're ending up in this like checkbox marketing. Like, oh, we got to have a newsletter because it's measurable. We got to have, it's like people have lost sight of like the fun in marketing. And I think especially B2B is just lacking this ability to just get creative. Like, we've fallen prey to like, we got to put a form on it. We got to checkbox it. We got to measure it. And it's just like, it's bland. It's not fun. It's not exciting. As a buyer, you tune it out. It's just, it puts you in this box of like, I just don't care about you.
Yeah. I think that like one of the root causes of this isn't just this like quest for perfect attribution, but also this like obsession with short-term thinking in revenue teams. Like, this probably doesn't apply to every company and industry, but like marketing, sales, revenue teams, they're often the team with the highest turnover rate. Like, pipeline targets are off, let's fire some of the BDRs or NDRs. Our ACV is slipping, let's fire some of our AEs. Like, I think this is part of the reason that revenue teams have such a very short-term way of thinking. Our turnover is super high. Like, more cold outreach probably does more harm to the brand in the long run, like you've written about. But, I won't be around to worry about that. So let's hit the phones. And it's easy for a CEO to say, like, my team needs to think long-term because the CEO is going to be there for the life of the company. But most of the folks on the team, like, probably won't. Like, how do we change that mindset, Mac? What are your thoughts there?
I don't know is the honest answer. I wish I could say like, oh, I have a perfect plan. Just do this. Obvious. It starts from the top. I think fundamentally, like you said, it's like it comes from the top, the expectations, and people people will follow those expectations, right? If you set these aggressive quarterly goals and you fire people when they miss one quarter of goals, like it just, it's not just the CEO's fault. It comes from the boards who are pushing for like super unrealistic growth targets, grow at all costs. I do think we're seeing a little bit of a shift in like a post-pandemic era, a little bit away from growth at all costs. We're seeing a little bit of like the, efficient, sustainable growth is more important. But I also, as I say that, I feel like I see more people talking about that than I see people actually doing that and acting on that. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know how you change it. I think there's a lot of deep-seated problems in how we build companies in general that cause this. And it goes like, you're going like, you got to go back to like the entire way companies are built and the purpose behind them and how they're funded and the expectations around them. It's one of those problems that you don't solve it by like implementing a new policy or changing a little bit about how your team works. So I know that's a bit of like a terrible answer, but I'm a big fan of, I don't know the answer, I'm not going to bullshit something. So
I think it's cool.
But it definitely comes from the top.
That's what I was gonna say too. This is a big cultural thing.
Yeah.
And like it's the way we work too, because you've got people on MBOs or quarterly targets. Like even marketers sometimes are on quarterly targets, so they have to do stuff. And then I was thinking too, like, how do we get people to not think that way? I also think it's who you bring on and who you decide to work with. You have to work with people or hire people that are passionate about what it is that you're working on, and
I will say it's more fun when you do it that way and hire that kind of person too. And I've also people tell us that they can feel the fun in our marketing. They're like, wow, your team is clearly having fun with it. And it creates this infectious energy that like, it's more fun for you. It's more fun for your customer. It's more fun for your market. Like, I don't know. I think I feel like unfortunately marketing is adopting more of the sales mindset more than sales has been adopting the marketing mindset. And like sales has this mindset of like, if it's not a grind, you're doing it wrong, right? If it's not painful, if you don't need to take your ice bath and be like, I made 400 cold calls and I got yelled at, like there's like this weird like badge of honor around like my job is so hard. And it's like, and I think it's really hard to convince people to change that behavior because they're just like, they go into it expecting it to be hard. And obviously it's hard. If it's worth doing, it's going to be hard. But I feel like a lot of what happens in GTM right now is the wrong kind of hard.
Yeah, the hustle, the grind, like people just wear that with a badge
like the
of honor.
sales bro culture. Just like, oh no, fuck off. I have no interest in that.
Sweet, Mac. We're getting close on time. We had two last questions for you, Daryl. I'll let you take the happiness question, but want to give you a chance to plug the product a little bit, Mac. Like I myself have been really curious to like check out like what the product actually does. Like I get the movement and I get that like warm intros work better, but like how does Commsor actually help you with that? Like when I was chatting about this with a few folks, they're just like, okay, yeah, cool. Like warm intros with first degree connections, like that's probably not going to get me super far, but you guys go a lot deeper than that. And you show like paths to like possible intro paths, like plug the product a bit, walk us through it.
So I will say for sure, you don't have to go that far for the impact to be that huge, which is I think once again, we're a quality play, not a quantity play. So like our data shows are like that. We have a bunch of data on like the impact of like deals are more likely to close, they close faster, ACV is higher, churn rate's lower when they come in this way. And with that average data, if you had last quarter, take whatever you did last quarter, however many meetings you booked, whatever, let's do the exact same quarter. Like literally nothing changes this quarter. Same number of meetings, same customers, same price points, everything's the same, except 10% of those meetings come from intros and referrals now. That has a 10 to 20% impact on revenue, a lift, because those meetings are more likely to close, like all that stuff. So it's like, that's just 10% of your meetings coming from this motion, and you've made 10% more money. Not more meetings, not 10% more meetings, just a change. So I think it's like, it's always fun when people push back on that to me because they're like, yeah, but like, it doesn't always work. I'm like, but you made 200 cold calls to get one meeting. What do you mean it doesn't always work? Like the entire thing you're doing is based on a model of it doesn't always work. So that argument just seems ridiculous. But essentially at our core, we map your network and we do a lot of work around connection strength. Not just like, hey, Mac and Phil are connected on LinkedIn. Like, good luck, have fun. Because we've all seen that where you go, hey, Phil, I saw you connected to Daryl on LinkedIn. Can you make an intro? And you're like, I don't know who Daryl is. I don't know why we're connected. I have 10,000 connections. Like, what? So we do a lot of work to try to map that out. We do I'll spare the detail. We look at like, employment overlap and like go as deep as like, hey, if you and I both worked at a 10-person startup, we probably know each other. You and I worked at Microsoft for 2-month overlap. That probably doesn't carry as much weight. And then we look at a bunch of other stuff, and there's like, it's a huge data science nightmare. It's definitely not a perfect problem, right? Like if you and I were best friends in real life or next door neighbors, like that's not going to show up. We look at professional overlap only. And then we handle the entire like intro process. So we actually turn the intro request into a trackable action, which makes managers happy. So we can track and say, hey, your team asked for 42 intros, 36 happened. These may turn into meeting, like da-da-da-da-da. So just like your cold call activity or your email activity, you can create sort of like an intro funnel. But we also do a lot more than intros. We do intelligence and influence as well. So maybe I'm not asking you for an intro to Daryl because I already am selling to Daryl, but I know you used to work with him. So I'm asking you for insight because you used to work at his company. So maybe you can help me figure out how the procurement process is going to work. So I go in more educated. Or I'm already at the 10-yard line or 90-yard line, shows you how much I know about football with Daryl about to close a deal. And I can say, hey, Phil, you're one of my happy customers. You used to work with Daryl. Can you just reach out and be like, hey, I heard you're on the, about to buy Commsor. It's awesome. You should totally do it. So we're really building a tool of like, how do you leverage your network across the entire customer journey? The intro part is really like the door opener for us though.
Yeah. I also feel like there's like a low hanging fruit part of it, like if these are like ripe opportunities for to make connections, why not use them? And then the other thing is like, you're kind of leaving money on the table if you don't, right? If you have these warm connections, if you have this network, why aren't you tapping into it? Why do you prefer earlier, the 2 out of 100 probability cold outreach? Like I think there's something to be said around that too.
We don't replace cold outreach. We are a step before you get to cold outreach. That's like we sell this step of like, check for the warm intro. Great. If no, you know what? You're probably going to have to cold call and email from time to time still. Our goal is to just reduce your reliance on that and get you warmer, better deals.
Cool. Very cool.
Yep. All right. We better wrap up and get to the last question. So Mac, you're a founder, serial entrepreneur, CEO, dinosaur lover, cat dad, home chef, runner, boulderer. One question we ask everyone on the show is, how do you remain happy and successful in your career? How do you find balance between all the things you're working on while still staying happy?
I think for me, it comes down to 3 things. And I think I learned this. This is my 5th company, so I learned this a while ago. Basically, as long as 3 things are true, I'm good. If one of these 3 stops being true, it's time to revisit something. Everything, partially, whatever. And it's basically, I want to work on something that people want to buy. So am I building something worth building? I want to build it with people that are smarter than me, that I have fun doing it with, that are worth doing it with. And I want to have fun while I'm doing it. If those 3 things are true, honestly, 99% of everything else will figure itself out or be figure outable. If one of those 3 things stops being true, that was for me, that was the wake up call that we had to pivot the business 2 years ago. Was like, those things weren't true anymore. We were no longer selling a thing that people were willing to spend money on. The team we were building it with was not the right team to build it with, and I wasn't having fun anymore. Great, something's gone terribly wrong. I'm a classic workaholic founder type. Like, I like my work. I don't feel like I have to go and search for a work-life balance. So yeah, you have up days and down days, but in general, it's for me, it's just I'm building a thing to solve a problem I care about that I can talk about for hours on end if you let me. And I know we're at time here, so you're pretty close to letting me over talk about this. And then it's just I don't know. I think honestly that's a good recipe just for life in general. Like, do things worth doing and have fun doing them. Everything else will figure itself out.
Awesome answer. I love those 3 rules there. Mac, we'll share out links to all the stuff we talked about today, the books and the guides that you've written that are ungated, by the way, folks. You can check those out without needing an email. This is super fun.
And if you do download them, our sales team is not going to hit you with 600 follow-ups afterwards, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, folks in the audience are definitely familiar with the drip campaigns of post ebook downloads.
No, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much for your time today, Mac. This is super fun.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Mac.